What is compassion fatigue? What are we looking at as far as symptoms? How do you measure it? And then also, how do you get to a better place with compassion fatigue? I did a presentation a little bit earlier today, so I happen to have his book sitting right up
Oh,
here.
cool.
But he literally wrote the book on compassion fatigue. Has been
Yeah.
studying it for at least 25 years at this point. And so definitely would encourage folks to look up his stuff. He has a YouTube channel.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Consult a qualified professional for your needs. Views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and not necessarily those of Meet Your Mental Helper Podcast LLC or its affiliates. We are not responsible for actions taken based on this content.
Hi, I'm Jim Weisbecker. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Arizona, Colorado, Florida, and Ohio. The reason I started the Meet Your Mental Helper podcast is kind of selfish in a way because I just love talking shop with colleagues. But I also think the world needs to know about some of these people. And the reason I say that is I'm amazed at how much they know. And I think to myself, they should be on a podcast. But they're not celebrities. They're just everyday counselors, therapists, coaches, psychologists that work in our communities and grind it out to help us heal and to help us grow. So let's meet today's mental helper. Welcome to Meet Your Mental Helper. Today we have Natasha D'Arcangelo from LB Health and also D'Arcangelo Counseling and Consulting. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to talk to you. You spent years in the classroom as a teacher and realized that students were struggling and it was more than you could give them as a teacher, and that kind of started you on the mental health point. What was the tipping point there where you realized it was time to make a change?
I don't know that it was one moment. I think it was more of a general feeling of dissatisfaction. It's a it's really intense when you are in elementary school and you are there for a significant chunk of the day and you're a kind of isolated pod and you get to know your students fairly well as their needs. And so what I was counting as progress, children who were able to build friendships or maybe were making a little bit of progress in their reading, but not necessarily jumping up a whole reading level. Those kinds of things don't get reflected on standardized testing. And in my experience, so much of the focus was on standardized testing. And I didn't go into teaching to help children do better on standardized tests. That was not my goal with that. And so when I moved down to Florida and I had an opportunity to work for Argosy University, one of the perks was free master's degree. So I said, sure, sign me up. And initially, I was going to do either school counseling or school psychology. I'd only ever worked with kids. It just kind of made sense. And a colleague of mine said, why don't you do clinical mental health counseling? If you do a clinical mental health counseling degree, it's going to open you up to be able to work with a much wider population of folks. And so it was one of those forks in the road that I didn't realize was a fork in the road. So I did the clinical mental health counseling track, and I'm really, really glad that I did. Now I work entirely with adults, which I would not have been able to predict for myself. But I am really grateful that I had that time in the classroom. I always tell clients at the intake session, I don't know how to turn off the teacher part of my brain. And so it very much influences the way that I show up in sessions. It has helped me a lot with my speaking engagements. And especially when I'm doing like a presentation for CEUs, for continuing education units, some of the feedback that I've gotten from audiences is that I do a good job of explaining things in a way that's easy to understand, and that's my education background, so
Yeah.
it has ended up coming in very handy.
Explaining things in a way that's easy, that's quite a radical concept.
Yes.
You know, for
Absolutely.
education. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, for those joining us, Natasha D'Arcangelo is a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, Idaho, Iowa, and Washington, and a licensed professional counselor in 5 additional states. A graduate of Argosy University, she is chief clinical officer for LB Health and owner of D'Arcangelo Counseling and Consulting. Her career spans inpatient psychiatric care, nonprofit leadership, and international speaking, with a primary focus on clinical treatment of compassion fatigue. Sign me up. Sign me up.
Sure, absolutely.
I deal with a lot of traumatized people, and it's what I like to do, and I enjoy helping that population, but it does take its toll on you.
It does.
How do you recommend dealing with compassion fatigue? And I have clients, for example, that are in nursing. I find
Mm,
that they have a lot of it as well.
for sure. Yeah. So what I always start with, again, that teaching brain is in my experience working with professional caregivers. So we're talking nurses, educators, mental health professionals, physicians, veterinarians, hospice workers, first responders, anybody whose job primarily is to take care of other people for a living are going to be susceptible to symptoms of compassion fatigue. However, those career tracks do an awful job of preparing folks for the reality that the very job that they're doing is leading them potentially down the road of compassion fatigue. I have yet to work with a nurse who was ever introduced to the concept of compassion fatigue during their training.
Wow.
I have yet to work with an educator who'd ever heard of compassion fatigue before they were sitting in a session with me. Mental health clinicians have kinda heard of it, especially when I'm doing a presentation to a group of clinicians, but to really have a good understanding of the definition as well as symptoms, much less prevention, I don't feel like I have been in front of a group of clinicians that's got a good understanding of it. So I think the very first place you have to start is by educating yourself. I had the honor and privilege of doing just about all of my compassion fatigue training under the, supervision and support of Dr. Eric Gentry, Gentry.
I actually took one of his
Isn't
classes.
he amazing?
Yes, to give him a plug, I was in my practicum,
Okay.
and I think it was a virtual class, but um I don't even remember exactly what it was. I tried something
Kind
with a
of
client because
trauma. Yeah.
you're in your practicum, you don't know
Yep.
anything. I
Yep.
tried something with a client, and they came back the next week and said, "This is the first time in 10 years I didn't have a nightmare."
Wow.
And at that point, I was like, "Okay, this is what I gotta do."
Yes.
Right? But
Yes.
it was, Dr. Gentry's course that got me interested in it, for
100%.
sure.
And
Mhm.
I cannot recommend his stuff enough. Number one, he does a great job of explaining very complex things in a
Yeah.
way that just makes it so easy to understand. And I tend to be a bit of a snob when I'm attending CEs because my bottom line question is, what are you giving me in this presentation that is actionable that I can take back and use in session with the clients that I'm serving, right?
100%.
And
Yeah.
he gives so much practical, concrete, real world stuff that you can implement immediately and that you immediately see results from, right?
Mhm. Totally.
And so, being able to train with him for 9 months was just an absolutely amazing experience, and that's where I was able to learn what is compassion fatigue? What are we looking at as far as symptoms? How do you measure it? And then also, how do you get to a better place with compassion fatigue? I did a presentation a little bit earlier today, so I happen to have his book sitting right up
Oh,
here.
cool.
But he literally wrote the book on compassion fatigue. Has been
Yeah.
studying it for at least 25 years at this point. And so definitely would encourage folks to look up his stuff. He has a YouTube channel. He's not into
Mhm.
gatekeeping. He's got a lot of stuff out there that is free. So even if you start with his free videos that are out there on YouTube, that's a really good resource to get started. But you have to start by understanding things. And if we don't have a solid foundation of what are we talking about, it's hard to get to a good place. The other thing that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is there is so much out there. This is top of mind because the American Counseling Association just released a statement yesterday that I was not a big fan of. Um, and there's a lot of talk about therapist self-care, and
Yes.
I'm not arguing that self-care is not important. Please don't misunderstand that. However, self-care is not the answer to compassion fatigue. You cannot dig yourself out of a compassion fatigue hole by going to get a massage once a month or by taking a walk every day. That's just not how it works. That completely ignores the neuroscience and the physiology of what's happening inside our bodies when we're struggling with compassion fatigue.
Hmm.
And, in some ways, it almost ends up becoming victim blaming where, we're in these systems that systemically essentially force us to fail, especially if you're doing community mental health.
I
Been there,
s-
done
uh,
that.
been there,
Um,
done that. Bill, Bill,
you're
Bill.
yes,
That's
yes, you're
Bill,
in
Bill,
these
Bill.
systems that are designed to
Yeah.
set you up to fail, don't
Hmm.
care about you as a human, much less a clinician, and you're gonna tell people, "Have you thought about meditating?" No. No, my friends, that is not the answer to compassion fatigue. So, that's always a thing that I like to address is that you self-care is not the answer to compassion fatigue. The neuroscience and the physiology behind compassion fatigue does not the answer to that is not go get a massage. That's not how this works. And I do
Or
think that it
take a
discourages.
bubble bath with
Oh
like
my word.
candles,
Yeah.
which I
I
don't
I have
do,
a
by the way.
cat. I can't take a bubble bath.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's true. There's definitely a nervous system component to it. And when you mentioned Dr. Gentry, I thought there's got to be some nervous system stuff here.
Mhm.
What?
Absolutely.
So when, let's say, I've had my bouts with compassion fatigue for
Mhm,
sure, or sometimes I call it empathy burnout, or
mhm.
I don't really have a name for it. But what's the first step that a caregiver can take?
So, I think first of all, understanding let's talk about what compassion fatigue means, right? So the most widely used definition of compassion fatigue was coined by Dr. Charles Figley, and he defines compassion fatigue as a combination of burnout and secondary trauma. So he identified that back in 1995. He further defined it as a state of exhaustion and dysfunction, biologically, psychologically, and socially, as a result of prolonged exposure to compassion stress and all that it invokes. So you have to think about those two ingredients essentially. There needs to be burnout and there needs to be secondary trauma in order for it to meet the definition of compassion fatigue. So if you do a review of the literature, that's going to be the most widely used definition, right?
Hmm.
So let's start there. You need to understand what you're looking at. You need to know what symptoms are. So that's the other thing. I think that as a field, this is what I hear in presentations, we're really good at blaming ourselves. We're really good at thinking, I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing enough. I need to go get another training. I need to quit the field, right? That's one that I
Hmm.
hear very frequently. I chose the wrong thing to do. And the truth is, you're probably struggling with compassion fatigue. Maybe the answer is to leave the field, but let's get a little bit more education under your belt and see what we're really looking at before you make a decision like that. Because potentially we can still save things. And so it's like when I'm working with, I also specialize in clients that have extensive histories of trauma, right?
Hmm.
And, it's like that first conversation that you have with them when you introduce them to the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and you have them take the ACEs. literally did this last week with a new client that I've started working with, and that particular client's ACEs score is an 8.
Hmm.
And they never conceptualized the stuff that they lived through as traumatic because for them it was normal. That's the environment that they grew up in.
Right. And for people watching, 4 or more is usually a red flag on the ACE.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I take things like that for
That's
granted.
okay.
My clinician brain, right?
Yeah.
But when they start to say, "Oh, wait a minute. So there's not something fundamentally wrong with me. There's actually, a whole body of research behind it. A very similar thing happens when we're working with professional caregivers. And I like to introduce them to a tool called the ProQOL early on in our work together. That's going to happen within the first 2 or 3 sessions. So the ProQOL stands for Professional Quality of Life Scale, and they're on the 5th iteration. So right now it's the ProQOL
Mm.
5. It's free, and I love free tools.
Yeah.
So
I
if
think
you
I actually did it at Community Health, and I don't
Sure.
know what the point was.
Well, they weren't gonna systemically change anything to help you be successful
Yeah.
there.
Here's
Well,
your 10 people to see today. It's
yeah, yeah,
okay.
exactly,
Well, thanks for doing that.
exactly. But it's proqol.org, PROQOL, proqol.org. And you can download either the physical form that, some people like to print it out and fill it out, but they also have it available online. So I've done it
Oh.
in session with caregivers before,
Hmm.
where we go through it and then we talk about what the scores mean. And you can see the light bulb go off when it's like, look, your score here is a moderate to severe, and it starts to normalize for them. Oh, so there's not something fundamentally wrong with me? No, there's not something fundamentally wrong with you. Then we can start to reconceptualize things, right? So I think if you start with the understanding of the definition and then you really take an objective look at what you can do to measure symptoms, then we can get into, okay, how do we get to a better place then, right?
Hmm.
And what I learned from Dr. Gentry, and I say this with no exaggeration, doing the training with him transformed my clinical practice.
Hmm.
I have learned how to self regulate when I'm in session with clients. Because what I did not know until I did my training with Dr. Gentry is that my nervous system was showing up in my sessions with clients.
Hmm.
And all of my traumagenesis, all of the things that I previously lived through, just as a human being on the planet, were impacting my work, my clinical work, in an unconscious way. So, the way that I explain this to folks is, let's say that you're like the client that I met with last week had a high ACEs score, 8 out of 10. Let's say that you're a clinician that has an ACEs score of an 8 out of 10. As this client is coming to you, it is likely that some of the things that they survived in their childhood are very similar to things that you survived in your childhood. Abusive and or neglectful caregivers, probably the use of some
Sure.
kind of substance use disorder, and so your nervous system is becoming activated, right? Not in a conscious way. You're not sitting there actively thinking, I want to be dysregulated with this client. But your nervous system kicks online because it's trying to protect you from what it recognizes as danger, right?
Hmm.
And so, if you are able to self regulate and you're able to interrupt your threat response, what ends up happening is you are no longer fighting your own nervous system. You're actually able to be more present with the client. You're able to be more sustainable in your work. And now, when you're sitting with clients that are recounting these traumatic histories to you, because let's be honest, I mean, we hear the worst of the worst, right? How many of us go through a week without hearing something like, I've never told anybody this before, but, and then your client kind of lays it out on you, right?
Hmm.
How beautiful and sacred is it that they feel safe to do that with us?
Right.
And also, we really do hear the worst of humanity. We really do.
Yeah. I always tell friends not in this world, they'll say, "What's it like?" I'll say, "Imagine the worst horror movie." and then multiply it by like 10 or 20.
Yeah,
And you wouldn't believe me if I told you.
correct. Yeah, yeah, because
You
it
know?
doesn't seem to be true. And, I think what's even more, misunderstood about that is clients don't realize how bad it was because they grew up in these environments and for them it was normal. And it's not until somebody like us comes along and says, "Do you realize that most 8-year-olds were not worried about things like this?" Most 8-year-olds were worried about, like, their spelling test on Friday, and your
Right,
brain was occupied with having to go get the groceries for your younger siblings because you knew that your caregiver was not capable of doing that since they were using whatever they were using, and if you didn't go get the food, nobody in the house was gonna eat. Most 8-year-olds don't have to do that,
right,
right? So we sit with this stuff day in and day out, and your nervous system can't help but to be activated, especially if it is very similar to the stuff that you lived through as well. So if you don't get to a place where you're doing self regulation in these sessions with clients, what's happening is you're further traumatizing yourself because your nervous system is trying to get you the heck out of there, right?
right.
You're kicking into panic mode and you're telling your nervous system to shut up because this person is paying to spend the next, 50 minutes with you. And you wonder why at the end of the day, you're just exhausted and you can't even talk to your family because you're so fried. It's because you've spent all day battling your own nervous system, right?
For sure.
Physiologically, our panic response is meant to help us for about 30 seconds, right? For 30 seconds, you're stronger, you're faster, you're smarter. And that's in moments where, let's say I'm taking the dog for a walk in the afternoon and we encounter apparently there's a bobcat in our neighborhood. So if we encounter this bobcat, I need my nervous system to be activated so that I can get the heck out of that situation, right? But what I'm
Right,
going to do is I'm going to scoop her up and I'm going to run as fast as I can, get back to my house, and then once I close the door behind me, I'm going to
hmm,
man, that was scary. Thank God we're okay, right? But what most of us do is we continue running away from that bobcat for 6, 7 hours a day. Yeah, you're gonna be exhausted.
hmm,
You're gonna be exhausted. Also, your bobcat is stuff that happened to you when you were 5, right? It's not happening present day. It's not happening real time. So we have to teach our nervous systems the difference between what's happening right now. Am I right now in immediate life threatening danger? Or is this a perceived threat? Because of something that I lived through at some point on my
yeah,
travels around the sun that now my nervous system is saying, danger, Will Robinson, danger. Most of us just unconsciously go through our days,
yeah.
in an activated nervous system.
The nervous system, I always tell people, kind of has its own radar, and
Mhm.
it certainly is tied in with the subconscious. That's why,
Yeah.
and I'm not picking on CBT or anything, but I've had clients go, "I've had years of CBT and I still feel it." It's like, well, it's because it's only cognitive. It's not generally
Yeah.
addressing your nervous system, and it's not addressing your subconscious. And, or clients will say, well, I have a great relationship now with my mom or my dad. So I feel guilty about
Mhm.
working on, how they beat me for years or
Sure.
whatever. And
Sure.
I always tell them, I'm glad you're as an adult, you guys have worked things out, but your nervous system still remembers 10-year
Correct.
old you and it still has that programming, you
Correct.
know?
And that doesn't mean that your nervous system is defective, right? That means that your nervous system is actually working the way that it was 100% designed to work. Because let's say that at the end of the day, and I use that same language too, your nervous system is a radar, that it's constantly scanning your environment and asking, "Are you gonna die? Are you gonna die? Are you gonna die? Are you gonna die? Are you gonna die?"
Yeah.
And it's trying to protect you. But let's say that you encounter something. This is the example that I always give. I was in a car accident in 2020. The other car was going too fast. In the rain, they lost control, slammed into me. I never knew what it looked like when every single airbag in the car deployed. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
There are a lot of them. Well, that happened here in Orlando on I-4. Fast forward almost 6 years. Every single time I get onto I-4, my body tenses up. And it doesn't matter if I'm driving or if I'm a passenger, my body tenses up. Not because today I'm in any life threatening danger, but my nervous system remembers what happened on I-4 and is trying really hard to protect me
Yeah.
from that danger that took place. Right. And
Mhm.
sometimes there is a pretty direct line. I give that example and people typically nod, like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. And sometimes that is what our traumagenesis looks like. Sometimes it's an example like that where our nervous system learned that something was dangerous. Most of the time, though, there's not always that direct line between point A and point B. Think about middle school. All of us survived middle school somehow or another. You couldn't pay me to go back. But
Yeah,
if
I
on the
agree,
first
agree.
yeah. If on the first day of middle school, you're in the cafeteria and you drop your lunch tray, right? And all of the food spills all over you and everything stops and all of the other kids stare at you. Your body is experiencing shame and embarrassment, but that gets hardwired into your nervous system as danger. So for the rest of your life, that's probably where your fear of public speaking came from, because for the rest of your life, if all of the attention is on you, your nervous system is going back to middle school you and what it felt like to be in that embarrassing, shameful situation. But present day, when you got to give a presentation to everybody in your company, you're not consciously thinking about that moment in middle school, right? But that's what your nervous system has gone back to. And that's why it's so important to have your nervous system ask those questions or for you to prompt your nervous system to think about those things. Um, is this a real threat or is this a perceived threat? Because present day, I'm not in middle school. I already survived that embarrassment of dropping that tray in the cafeteria, right?
Right.
But you're having those panic responses as though it were happening present day. So you need to help differentiate between, is it something that's happening right now? Am I in immediate life threatening danger? And the answer is almost always no. And if the answer is
Mhm.
no, then you don't need your panic response. It's simply not necessary.
And sometimes if, they're already in that fight, flight, or freeze response, it may be even hard to ask that question.
Mhm.
What do you recommend? Like, I do a lot of reprocessing with EMDR. That's my main thing. And I always tell clients, I use this example of myself. I had a sinus infection 30 years ago, but it was every fall and spring, I'd be just sick for months.
Mm,
And so finally, I had the surgery, and I was at the point where I could use normal over the counter antihistamines or
okay.
so I always tell them that's the same way I had this surgery. I don't get sick anymore, but I still sneeze and
Mhm,
I still get colds, but they're colds I can manage. And I tell them about it. The analogy is with your trauma, you're still going to, when you get on the I-4, you still may have a moment,
mhm.
but it isn't going to shut you down where you got to get off and quit driving. So,
Right, right.
do you recommend for people, caregivers that if they have any on the ACE, that they, take care of that as well, or take
Oh,
care of that
100%. Yes.
first?
Yeah. I didn't realize she was in the office with me, but here's
Oh,
the
it's
kicker.
okay. I can relate.
So what I recommend to caregivers, you're just gonna steal my Post-it note? All right, apparently that belongs to her now. What I recommend for caregivers is not just the ProQOL, not just the ACEs, but also the PCL. because we all know that trauma happens after the age of 18 as well, and the PCL will capture those traumatic experiences. But we have to Dr. Gentry has a whole again, this is why I recommend the book,
Yeah.
but he's got a whole thing that he walks you through where you actually will go through all of the trauma associated with your professional career, right?
But
Because
I actually have that book, that cover now. I have it as a PDF, or it's a
Mhm.
I actually now you got me inspired. I'm gonna dig it out.
Yeah, yeah. What he has you do is
Mhm.
he has you walk back through those traumatic experiences. And again, these things that you don't even realize your nervous system is holding on to. Like for me, my negative association with notes came from a previous supervisor that I had that would essentially use them as like a punishment. She would print out, man, and I vividly remember this. She would print out how many notes you had due on a Friday, and you couldn't go home until you came to her and showed her that all of your notes were done for the day. And so my nervous system learned to have this incredibly negative association with notes. And I know a lot of clinicians struggle with the
Right.
documentation, but that's where it started for me. And so I had to learn to get myself into a regulated body. And one of the things that I again learned was I choose to do this work. I could go back to teaching. I could do a number of any other things, but I love what I do. I consider it a privilege to be able to spend this time with the clients that I sit with. And part of that means I'm also choosing to do documentation because every time that I have a session, I also have to document that that session took place. So, in my choice to do this work, I'm also choosing to do the documentation as well. And by engaging in self regulation while I'm doing my documentation, I'm not further traumatizing myself because I had that boss at one point that made that an incredibly negative association for me. So we have to work on the stuff that we're carrying around on a day-to-day basis, oftentimes that we're not even consciously aware of, that is impacting the work that we're doing. One of the exercises that I completed with, when I was doing my cohort with him, was a mission statement exercise where he takes you through a writing exercise where you really have to dig down and identify your core values, your North Star, what drives you, right?
Mhm.
And in my mission statement, my favorite sentence out of there is that my purpose on this planet is to help people. And so instead of focusing on what other people think about me, what my performance review says, what my title is, my gauge now is, did I help somebody today? And so if I get accolades from my boss or I get feedback from a presentation or I get feedback from a client, it feels nice. It's icing on the cake, right? If
Mhm.
I know that I helped somebody that day, then I lived according to my core values and I did what I'm here to do. And that has now become my measure of success. And so all that external stuff is just noise.
Mhm.
And I'm not waiting on somebody else to validate me. And I think a lot of us grew up with this external locus of control, and we're constantly waiting for somebody else to validate us. And that is quite frankly, and I work with a lot of caregivers who think that the solution is to find another job. And sometimes it is, but also
Mhm.
you're taking the exact same nervous system to the new job. You
Exactly.
fundamentally haven't changed inside. Now, that other job could very well be an incredibly toxic work environment where, the admins in charge don't have any idea what the heck they're doing. However, you still have the ability to control what's happening inside your nervous system. And maybe that job is a means to an end, right? And you're only there long enough to, I had a nurse that I was working with a few years ago where the place that they were working gave them a pretty significant sign on bonus. but that meant that they were locked in for a period of time. Well, it turns out they were miserable at this job.
Mhm.
And so what we worked on was, you're not going to change the admin at the place. They don't know what they're doing. They've never done your job, right?
Mhm.
What can you do on a day-to-day basis? What are you in control of? What choices are you making that can help you make it through the next, I don't remember, it was 6 months or 9 months or whatever the terms of the contract were, right? That's our end goal. We're just trying to get you to, let's call it December 31st. Once December 31st hits, you're riding off into the sunset. Let's figure out what your next plan is. But for the next 9 months, you're here and you can choose to go into work every day. This is awful. I hate it. I can't wait till I'm out of here.
Right.
Or you can choose to say, you know what? Today I am going to do my best, and my best is good enough. And my goal here today is to help at least one patient that I see.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It reminds me of Carol Dweck's growth mindset,
Mm,
where you take your reward from the process, not the end result.
mhm.
And I use that with a lot of people too. I go, if you know you put in the effort today, who cares what the
Yeah,
supervisor said? Who cares what?
yeah.
If you can go home, put your head on the pillow at night and go, I did everything I could. It's a lot less disturbing than going, I must have this many widgets made by 5 o'clock
Yes, yes.
or
Because
whatever it is.
here's the other truth that I never thought about until I did all of my training is workplaces are designed to keep you in a constant state of stress. That's literally what they're designed to do because that's how they get productivity out of you.
Hmm.
Regardless of whether you're seeing patients, building cars, cleaning offices, whatever it is that you're doing, your workplace is designed to keep you in a constant state of stress. So, having no idea what the folks listening do for a living, I can guarantee you that if you spent the next month at your job 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it still wouldn't be done.
Totally true.
Does
Yeah.
that make you a failure?
Hmm.
Or does that mean that you're working in impossible circumstances?
I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but there are companies now that don't have a vacation policy.
Mhm.
In other words, you can take as much time as you want, they say. And
The unpaid
what
PTO.
studies have showed is no one's leaving ever.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's like, it sounds cool. Like, "Oh, I can just take a day off anytime I
yep,
want or a week off, or that they told me I could take a month off."
mhm,
But what this research shows that they're not even taking the standard, like, say, 2-week vacation.
correct, yes, because there's always more to be done, and my
Mhm.
argument to you is that doesn't make you a failure. That doesn't mean that you're fundamentally doing something wrong. That means that you are put in impossible circumstances where there's no way that you can succeed. Can't possibly get all of these things done. So instead, let's figure out what your core values are. Let's figure out what your North Star is. What's actually driving you? Let's have you redefine what success looks like for you. And then let that be your measure, right? Um
That's a great I love that North Star example.
yeah.
That's a be
So I figured this out the hard way because I always left a job out of fear. Because I've done so much work in the nonprofit sector, in education, in mental health, and I've always left out of fear. I always left because I wasn't happy with management. In community mental health, I was making $15 an hour with my master's degree. And it was always, I never was jumping to something good. I was just trying to escape from the place where I was. And then I wondered mysteriously, why did nothing get better at the next place? And a few years ago now, I made the decision for the first time in my professional life to leave a job not out of fear, but because I recognized that the mission of the place where I was working was no longer aligned with my core values. And it took
Mhm.
me 6 months of interviewing and applying, but I was really, really mindful of where I was going to. And when I interviewed with that CEO, It was Lakewood Residential Treatment Center, shout out to them. Their CEO and their core mission was really to serve the residents that live there and to provide them the highest quality life that they possibly could. And they do that every single day. And I was able to help do that every single day. And so the business mission and my mission lined up. And so while the work was hard and it was time consuming and we had some difficult days, I always felt at the end of the day like I had helped somebody. And that kept me going back to work day after day, not to mention the fantastic team that I worked with as well.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and I am very I want to say lucky, but also it was because of the decisions that I made that I'm able to say the same thing about my work at LB. Our CEO, shout out to Lauren Howard, is absolutely amazing and knows what drives me. And when we had our talk, before LB was even a thing, I said to her, she told me she wanted me to bring me on as chief clinical officer, and I said, "That's fine, but I need you to understand, I am a clinician. I am not a business person. And so all of my decision making is going to be made with the thought in mind of, is this going to benefit the clients that we're serving?" And she said, "Yes, duh." And I said, "Okay, I just want you to be aware of that because I've worked for other
Oh,
places that
yeah.
are very profit driven, and that's not what I'm looking for." And kudos to her, she let me stick around. So,
Yeah.
but I was never able to do that before because I was constantly chasing this validation of what's it gonna say on my performance review, right? And all they care about in a lot of those places is what are you billing per month?
Right.
None of us went to grad school to be seeing a certain number of clients a month or to be billing a certain amount for a company a month. That's not why we got into this field.
My first community health job, they sent out an email every week. It was called the email of shame. And
No.
they would show from who was top to bottom in billing. And then if you weren't where they wanted, they highlighted those names in red. I was always at the top. I'll pat myself on the back, but
Oh
I
my
also had, that was the beginning of
goodness.
my burnout journey. But
How horrifying.
yeah, and they said, "Oh no, we're trying to encourage you. We're just trying." Well, no, you're showing, but that's, and I know people maybe watching this go, "Well, that can't be if they're in mental health. They wouldn't do that." But
You'd be surprised. You would be surprised.
yeah. So if you're working with somebody, say a nurse who's got to keep it together on the floor, what are some, and I know we can't do a deep dive on the whole program, but what are some things that they can do or you teach them to do?
So the first thing that we do is we spend a lot of time figuring out what their stress response looks like. For a lot of us, we're so disconnected from our bodies that we just kind of go through our day on autopilot, especially if we're in a workplace that we hate and that we just are, drudging through day in and day out. So the first thing that we have to figure out is what happens inside your body, inside your mind when you're feeling stressed out. And when I ask that question, I almost always get a blank stare like, "What?" And I'm like, "Well, think about it. What happens?"
Mhm.
And then we really have to sit with it because they're like, "Well, I never thought about that before." And I said, "Well, yeah, but I'm here to ask the weird questions." So we have
Right.
to come to a place where they're able to identify those things. And then we have to figure out, okay, let's help your nervous system understand. Is it a real threat or is it a perceived threat? If you get an email from your boss that you spent too much time with a patient this morning, is that a real threat or is that a perceived threat? Because right now you're going into panic mode when you see that email and it's probably making you really angry, right? But are you in actual life threatening danger? And then they're like, "No." And I'm like, "Yeah, so you don't need your panic response. You're giving your boss, who quite frankly doesn't sound like a nice person, giving them a lot of power over you. Let's reclaim some of that." So let's look at that now as a perceived threat. Can we agree? You're not an immediate life threatening danger. Yeah, absolutely. It made you angry. It's making me angry on your behalf, right? But it's not a life threatening danger. So it doesn't require your panic response. So let's practice some self-regulation skills. And so we go through the self-regulation skills, and I like to go through 4 or 5 of them so they've got a good toolkit that they can access at any time. And what I let them know is, "You don't need me for any of this. I want you to take this, and you spend a lot more time not with me than you do with me, right?
Sure.
Use it out there in the real world." So once we get to that place and they're able to recognize, okay, my boss is really making me angry right now, but I'm not about to die. Let me utilize one of those self regulation skills that Natasha and I talked about. And they're
Okay.
able to interrupt their own threat response. They get to a place where they're getting better and better with that. And it does really feel empowering because you can now look at that email and be like, God, my boss is awful. Have they ever even worked with a patient? Which
Mm-hmm.
is very different than my boss is ruining my life. I hate it here and I need to leave. Right.
And I'm doomed.
Um,
Yeah.
and then we work on some of the other stuff. We work on, let's do your mission statement together. Let's figure out what your North Star is. Let's identify what's actually driving you. And at the end of the day, the answer to that might be, it sounds like we're using a nurse as an example. So I'm going to say hospital. It
Sure.
sounds like the hospital where you're working is not really aligned with your core values as a nurse. Maybe it's a good time for you to start looking to see, is there a facility that you can work that is more aligned with your core values? What does that look like? Where is that place? Does that place exist? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we start working on those kinds of things. And it's a similar path for educators, similar path for mental health clinicians. But we spend, I think, a lot of time, and I mean, I did it too. I'm not excluding myself from this. We spend so much time waiting for our workplaces to recognize us and to value us. And some places just are never going to. They are toxic workplaces. They are there because they're there for the bottom line. And mental health centers are invaluable. And they serve the neediest people in this country. They
Absolutely.
could be so much better, but they're so horribly run, right?
Right.
And are you, like, as a pre-licensed clinician making $15 an hour with my master's degree, how much power do I actually have to change that system fundamentally? Not a whole lot. But
Right.
can I go on, become fully licensed, get some good work experience under me, and then maybe go back as an administrator in that same community mental health system where I can impact real change,
Great point.
right?
Yeah.
So maybe this is not a thing that I can change now, but maybe this is a for now thing that's leading me to a higher purpose later on,
Mm-hmm.
right? But with the state of the world as it is, and I'm speaking specifically to mental health clinicians at this point, there's so many of us leaving the field. I mean, the burnout
Mm-hmm.
since COVID has been astronomical. Not that it was ever great, but it's
Right.
really been astronomical. And I don't really think that we're doing enough to support clinicians in the way that they need to be supported, which is why I really do feel honored to be able to come on to places like this and speak directly to
Oh,
folks and
and I was
tell
going to
them,
mention at the bottom of the podcast, you can find all of Natasha's contact information if you'd like to get some of her trainings or work with her.
yeah,
And
please reach
Natasha,
out.
you got a lot of licenses.
I do.
Do you also see people on like a coaching level? Because I was thinking of somebody who could sure use your help, but
Yeah,
they're not in, they're
in
actually in
one of the states.
Arizona. They're here in Arizona, but
Yeah. So I'm a certified professional resilience coach and consultant. And
okay.
so that specifically allows me, the coaching stuff allows me to work with folks through the compassion fatigue stuff specifically to
Okay.
help you get to a better place with some of those symptoms. And it doesn't have to be like formal individual therapy like we specifically think about. So, yeah.
The person I'm thinking about is stuck in it's not a mental health job, but they are interacting with a lot of residents of a community,
Mhm.
and it's a nonprofit, so there we go. And
Well,
it's but a lot of that I think would apply to this person,
for
you
sure.
know.
Yeah, for sure. And again,
So,
that's why I use the term caregivers, right?
Mhm.
Because that's such a broad umbrella. But the truth is that when your job is taking care of other people for a living, I don't think that they prepare us well enough for that. I couldn't tell you how many times when I was in community mental health, I would pull up in the parking lot and sit in my car and have to like talk myself into going into the building. I mean,
Mhm.
more mornings than I care to admit, honestly. Like you have to go into the building. You have a mortgage to pay. Like you have to go
Yeah.
in and do this. And I really wish I had known then what I know now about compassion fatigue, but I do think that these things happened in the sequence that they did for a reason. Because I learned a lot in community mental health. Working, you spend a year and a half on an inpatient psychiatric unit. You learn so much about the DSM in a completely different way.
for sure.
So,
I
yeah.
remember I got my EMDR training when I was in community mental health, and we would have consultations, with the
Mhm.
trainers in between the
Mhm.
big trainings. And then, we'd have like it was virtual, and there'd be like six of us on there, and she'd say, "How many did you do this week?" And they'd go, "Well, I'm talking this one client into trying it." And the next person, they'd go, "How many did you do?" And they'd say, "Well, I'm just kinda playing." I had my cousin come over, and we kinda just did a few of the exercise. Then she comes to me and she goes, "How many did you do?" And I said, 45. And she she goes,
What?
"What? Are you sure you're understanding my question?" I go, "No,
Yes.
that's all I see are traumatized people all day."
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm just going for it.
what I do. Yeah.
And I always remember she was looking at me like, "You're kidding me, right?" I go, "No, no,
No, I
45."
I wish I were. Yeah, yeah. And I
But
do
it
also think that there's great value in some of those somatic,
Well, and
those modalities.
I wouldn't have been able to do it if I mean, I got immersed in it, and
Correct.
the work I'm doing now is because of that. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm, I'm not saying it was bad. It was just
For sure. Absolutely. It's a learning experience, right?
for
100%.
sure.
And for
Yeah.
me, I'm a brain spotting clinician. I have my wand handy. Uh,
Mhm.
but I love to offer brain spotting as an additional modality to folks that,
Tell
you know,
people a little bit about that because I'm not an expert on it.
Sure. So Brain Spotting was founded by Dr. David Grand. And the whole foundation of Brain Spotting is where you look affects how you feel, right? So we know when we do functional MRIs, for example, of folks that have those high ACEs scores, you can literally see the areas on the brain where the trauma lights up when you compare that to somebody who has an ACEs score of a 1, which is not considered clinically significant. So what we do is I just held up my wand. We utilize the wand to help the client figure out where in your system does that live for you. And the wand helps to kind of cut through the logic. We want to stay in the logical part of our brain, but that's not where we're able to move the trauma through to resolution. Because we'll talk about trauma in circles for days. And that's not oftentimes helpful or it doesn't feel like a resolution to clients, right? And so we'll typically go vertically first and then or I'm sorry, horizontally first and then the vertical axis. And what I like about brain spotting is that it's very client led. No two sessions are ever the same, but once we find the point of activation, we sit there with them, we hold our space, and we're just in attunement with the client. And I've had it happen before where I had a client, it was just about complete silence for 40 minutes. But I could see her processing in her face. And at the end of the session, she was able to verbalize what came up for her, and she had never been able to verbalize it before. So what I like about brain spotting is that it cuts through all the logical circles that we want to make around things, really
Mm-hmm.
gets to the heart of where things are living in our nervous system and allows clients a different way to be able to process things. Now, if you do have extensive trauma, we're not going to be able to resolve everything in one session of brain spotting,
Sure.
but I have found that we'll get to a place in brain spotting in 1 or 2 sessions that would have taken us, like, 6 months of talk therapy to get through, right? Because you can't, logically identify where things are connected in your system. It just we're not wired that way. And what sold me on brain spotting is I'm a firm believer in not asking clients to walk a journey I've not taken myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there was a fellow clinician who was working on her certification on brain spotting and needed some folks to do some sessions with. And I said, I want to know about it. I want to know if this is a thing I should get trained in. And she said, well, you need to work on a real problem. This is not going to be a role play. And I said, well, the time I was studying for the Oregon jurisprudence exam and I have really bad test anxiety. And she said, well, we can absolutely work on that. And so
Okay.
she did the frame setup for me, and I went all the way back to 4th grade.
Mm-hmm.
I You could have talked to me every week for an hour in in a session.
Yeah.
I never
Yeah.
would have gone back to 4th grade, but in
Right.
one session of brain spotting, I was able to identify that's where my test anxiety started for me. So,
Mhm.
it cuts through that noise.
Yeah, and there we go again. There's always that strand back to
Yes.
somewhere,
Yes. Yes.
that,
It was there in my nervous system. I just didn't know it was there.
and when you follow the wand, are you staying on the wand then when they say stop, or how does that
Yeah,
work?
so when we go across, we'll go across first.
Mhm.
They have to, well, and again, it depends on the client. Some clients have that ability to connect with what's happening in their body. Not every client is able to do that. So it kind of depends on how they are with that. Let's say I have a client that is able to connect with what's going on with their body. We'll identify what it is that they want to work on that day. Let's say they had a performance review, they didn't get the promotion. And so they got a lot of stuff going on around that. So we'll go across first and they'll monitor where does that feel most activating for you? And then we'll
Okay.
find where the point is vertically. Where does it feel most activating for you? Make sure
Hmm.
that they can comfortably sit with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I shut up and get out of the way and let them do what they're doing. There are different frameworks. That's just a basic one for folks that are able to connect with what's happening inside their body. But there's lots of other setups that you learn how to do in the brain spotting training. Um, and then you kind of go from there and you let their body kind of lead you, and you check in every so often and see where they're at. But it what I find is that it gives clients the freedom to go there and to trust your body, to trust your nervous system, to know that it's doing what it's doing and it's leading us to where you need to go. And sometimes, let's say we might start with the promotion. That's what you come to me with. It's at the top of your mind. You're
Mm-hmm.
activated at a 9 out of 10, right? And
Right.
we may end up going back to something that happened in kindergarten, and you would never be able to tell me that those 2 things are connected. But again,
Yeah.
we're able to cut through that noise, because we did a brain spotting session. So
Yeah.
I really enjoy brain spotting both as a civilian and as a clinician. I found it to be very helpful for me personally too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's a fair amount of training for that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so well, the other nice thing about brain spotting is, once you do phase 1, you can actually utilize brain spotting with clients. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
requirement that you become certified. That's a personal choice that people
I
make.
see.
And there's phase 1, there's phase 2, there's phase 3, there's phase 4, and then there's also specialties. So if you work with folks that are adopted, there's an adoption training.
Okay.
If you work with adolescents, there's adolescence training. If you work with chronic illness, there's, trainings for that. So you can also choose your subcategories for whatever it is that feels most appropriate for you. Dr. Grand also does special trainings as well if you're really looking for high level stuff from the
Mm-hmm.
founder himself, which is really amazing. I'm still waiting for my calendar to line up so I can go do a training with Dr. Grand. But yeah, I found it to be a particularly helpful modality, especially for the clients that do have those extensive histories of trauma.
Yeah. Well, I was sitting here today thinking I've got all these questions and I haven't even gotten to half of them. But let's think about doing it again
Sure, sure.
because I would love to talk to you more about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything you have coming? I know you do trainings. You're a speaker. Anything coming up that
You?
maybe?
Yeah, hold on, let me see. I gotta pull up my calendar because my calendar is what keeps me organized. But I
Sure.
I have one, coming up that I'm going to be doing for, Pacific Northwest CEs, and that is actually gonna be next Friday, and that's going to be on compassion fatigue. And then in April, I'm doing one for Aaliyah Academy, again on compassion fatigue. So I've got a couple coming up, but folks are more than welcome to contact me if they're looking for more information or registration links for those.
Yeah, and I'll also put all your contact info at the bottom of the
Wonderful.
podcast.
Thank you.
So, Natasha would be a good resource. I've learned so much talking to you today, and
Oh, I'm
it's
glad to hear that.
helpful to me. I'm not trying to squeeze in a free therapy session, but it's been really helpful to me. I'm going to definitely dig out that book and look at it again
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I think for me, it kind of goes in waves, like
Yes.
sometimes I'm like, I love this. Then other
Yep.
times I'm like, I don't know if I can pull myself into that front door
Yep.
and I work for me.
Yeah.
So, and I'm mean to me. I'm always putting me in a constant state of you're not finished. I always
Yes.
tell people I'm the meanest boss I've ever had, but I think that's kind of normal,
Yep.
but
I agree.
for sure. But thank you so much, Natasha, for spending. I know you're
Absolutely.
busy and spending some of your time today, and I hope it was educational to me. I'm sure others will find it that way too.
I hope so.
And let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good. I'm happy to come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Meet Your Mental Helper. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. If you'd like to learn more about our guest, you can find them on our guest directory at meetyourmentalhelper.com. You can find their social media links to follow them and also ways to directly contact them. If you would like to be on the podcast, join our Meet Your Mental Helper network. And we have several memberships that support the work we do that allow unknown experts to be seen. Look forward to hearing from you soon and see you at our next podcast.